Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
The real pleasure of this job is when you find something that's such a pleasant surprise. It catches you off guard more than you even expected. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and not only, ask about current projects, but, influences, state of the business, how they got started, all sorts of fun stuff. It's, we try to keep it light. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, and I think you would because you're listening right now, you can find us over on Apple Podcasts, over at Spotify, and you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel. Also, we'd really like it if you would follow us on social media. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's Instagram. You can do it either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, please visit us over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, with our hardworking team who's cracking away on movie news, reviews, and everything else under the sun. And they'd appreciate some eyes on the product, and I know I certainly would too. But on to this episode. Who are we talking to right now? Oh, that's right. It is my delightful, pleasant surprise of lockdown, COVID, whatever we're going to do with everything sort of dumping itself onto streaming platforms. And we're going to talking about the Arrow Video platform, and we're talking about the new film, which is called A Ghost Awaits, which is really it's a no budget rom-com, little bit scary, a little bit funny. It straddles a whole bunch of different lines, and we get a young man who's sort of at a crossroads in his life, and he gets a job to clean a house. But little does he know the house is haunted, and in the course of trying to reason with the ghost or trying to even exorcise the ghost, he ends up falling in love with her. It's this really, really interesting mashup between like Beetlejuice, Reality Bites, some rom-coms. It's such a fresh little mix, and it is streaming right now on the Arrow Video streaming service, which you can sign up for. There, you can get a free month, and it is $4.99 a month after that. It's a really good service if you like the Arrow Video brand. And we talked with writer-director Adam Stovall and writer and star MacLeod Andrews about the film, and well, let's let them talk. Now, first off, fuck man, I love the movie. It's so good.
That's so lovely to hear. Thank you.
It's so good. Beetlejuice meets this third life existential crisis versus this really sweet romance kind of rolled into a ball, and it's absolutely delightful. Walk me through, I guess, the idea for this story and just sort of the unique way you wanted to tell it.
Well, clearly it's based on a true story. The idea really, MacLeod and I had spent a year trying to make another movie and got really close. And when that didn't happen, I took it kind of hard. And so I'd gone back to Northern Kentucky, Greater Cincinnati area, which is where I grew up. And my friends Brian and Jen Price had me play this video game called PT, which is a first-person haunted house puzzle game created by Guillermo del Toro and Hideo Kojima. And I'm not a big video gamer, but for reasons that will become very clear in a second, I was like, yeah, I like Guillermo del Toro. Like, I'm down to waste some time. And I started playing it, and I just had them cracking up laughing because I was reacting to a haunted house the way I would, where you're walking through and a spooky noise happens, and I'm just like, nope, don't need to investigate that. I'm fine.
And they're like, well, that's the point of the game, Adam. You're supposed to go and investigate it. Otherwise, you'll never win.
I'll win by staying right here.
That's right. The true win. Yeah. So, I had them laughing, and I thought, there might be a movie in a character kind of like myself dealing with a haunted house. I couldn't think of I couldn't think of another movie where I'd seen that. And then around that time, I'd seen a webcomic called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, where a man asks a woman, what do you think is the most American movie? And she says Ghostbusters, because here's a movie where you have demonstrable proof of an afterlife, but the whole thing is about growing a small business and navigating government bureaucracy. And I thought, well, A, that's hilarious. And B, oh yeah, ghosts would mean there's an afterlife. I have so many questions. And so between those two things, it kind of formed the spine of what became A Ghost Waits. And then in terms of how we wanted to tell it, we knew we weren't going to have a lot of money. We had tried to make stuff before. I'd written a script that people liked, but we couldn't raise enough money. I wrote a smaller script that people liked. We couldn't raise enough money. And so it just became like, okay, what do we know we can get? What do we know we can do? And this, it was just kind of fun to tell kind of a heightened story in very grounded storytelling.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was that first act that really sort of got me hooked, because I mean, it was a complete no-sell. It was like, oh, the door is opening. Oh, the chair is rocking. I was like, okay, I want to see where this is going. Like, for you guys crafting this, I'm trying to figure out the balance between wanting to tell a ghost story versus wanting to tell a romantic story versus wanting to be funny, because it does straddle sort of all three lines pretty well.
I think the humor is, there's going to be humor in kind of whatever we do. Humor and romance are just two places where it's two of my favorite things. I love romantic comedies, and I love a good romance, and I love a great comedy. So those were actually really easy to do. We had to remind ourselves that we were making a ghost story, and like, oh, right, there needs to be horror moments. Like MacLeod would just be like, hey, we should probably like have that move. And like, oh yeah, that would be smart. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me about the ghost part of the title. Well,
and I mean, I'm curious because, I mean, especially when you're trying to raise money and whatnot, because I mean, the end of the, like, not to spoil it, but traditionally what happens at the end of your movie is not a happy ending, but for this, it actually is kind of the happy ending. Like, how big of a sell was that to sort of give this very sort of macabre twist that still ended up being kind of happy?
How do you mean, how big of a sell?
Well, in terms of not only getting it made, but like sort of showing it to producers to find funding to go, oh, but wait a minute, at the end of the movie, the main character does what? And we're supposed to be happy about it?
So the really fun part so we had a very small budget, of course,
yes.
But we had basically two investors, and one of them was my mom. We had met M.F. Thomas in the course of trying to make a movie the previous year, or trying to make a previous movie, and he was really excited to make something. And so for him, I'd had the idea. He was talking to our mutual friend Nick Thurkettle, who's a co-producer on the movie, and also a filmmaker. He's made a bunch of short films, and he has a podcast, Earbud Theater, where they do audio dramas. But he had been talking to Nick and asked, like, what's going on with Adam, and he said, oh, Adam had this weird haunted house idea. And we got on the phone, and I walked him through what I knew of it at the time, and he said, okay, I can do X amount of money. And we knew that there was a draw to, like, he wanted to get into the world of film investment and creative producing, but typically you have to write a much larger check to do that. So for his on his end, the appeal was a lower cost of entry. And on our end, because once we had his money, my mom had said, when you have a number, let me know, and if we can match it, we will. And so I did that, and they could match it. What's nice with having such a tiny budget, though, is that you don't have to worry about the four quadrants. You really don't even have to worry about one. You can make a movie for 9 people. And that was like, okay, we may never get to do this again, so let's tell a story that only we can tell. And that ending, the extremely complicated tonality of that ending,
right? Yeah,
is just us, man. Like, it's just kind of what we do. Everybody perceives this world in their own way, And the best thing that you can do as an artist is to articulate it, is to articulate that unique experience. You know, this is my experience of depression. This is my experience of suicidal ideation. And the hardest part with suicidal ideation, of representing it, is that people don't even want to talk about that shit, much less watch it.
Right.
So it's like, okay, if you can just give me like 80 minutes, I'm going to show you a path of empathy that you may not have considered before.
No, and I mean, I think you're right, because there is this real empathy and sort of humanity to the whole story. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, from both your perspectives, how is it to sort of, I'm looking for the right word to say this, because you're telling a story that can be grounded very much in reality, on mental health issues, on social issues, depending on what's going on based on your life. But there is this sort of creative and very sort of freeing DIY energy that comes out through the film. And I mean, it's an interesting one to balance. And I mean, I'd love to hear both your perspectives on that, because like you say, I mean, I don't even think you can call this a low budget movie. It's probably a no budget movie, really, when you put it in perspective.
We've heard micro thrown around, and micro maybe works.
Nano budget.
Nano budget.
Nano. I've never heard nano. Okay.
I haven't heard nano, but that probably is also accurate.
He's very little, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go. Well, I was just going to try and clarify the question a little bit. Actually, I got caught up trying to figure out a proper term for our level of budget. So could you reiterate it?
Well, just in terms of straddling, like giving us a story that on one end, like I say, has these very sort of grounded real world issues, but on the other end is funny, is entertaining, because it's hard to sort of present some of these issues but still do it in an entertaining fashion. And I think this film does that.
I mean, that's life. Like, life is funny and fucked up and sad and horrific and awesome and boring and everything else. Like, I think one of the things that really excites me about genre storytelling is that it's opera. You know, like you use the trappings of genre, whether it's sci-fi or action or horror or whatever, to get at something much deeper. I love a straight drama. I love a straight comedy. But there's something really kind of cool about taking something like aliens or ghosts or something that's not real, that is just on its face. And I mean, obviously there's people that believe in ghosts and aliens and everything else, but taking something that is not real and using that to speak to the truth of a matter is really exciting. And I think it kind of opens up the door. It lets things be a bit more fluid and flexible. Your suspension of disbelief is like, fuck you. The title is A Ghost Waits. Like, if you don't come in here with that suspension of disbelief ready,
exactly.
Come on. But then it's kind of on Natalie and MacLeod to really portray that reality. You know, if their performances ever falter, it falls apart.
No, and you're absolutely right, and they don't fall apart. And I'm MacLeod, for you, getting into this sort of headspace, because I mean, I've got to imagine it was a quick shoot, and I mean, and obviously you guys are both friends. How much can you sort of separate the personal relationship and kind of get into the character so you can sort of capture the moment at the right time?
For this one, I think every performance is different. You have to kind of approach from a different angle. For this one, I actually worked the opposite way. I rarely tried to separate. I tried to just sort of drop as many defensive barriers as I could and meet the material and the scenes with as much sincerity and honesty and good humor as I could. I mean, in the certain aspects, the aspect of, Jack's depression and sort of Adam's rendering of him and Adam's own personal experiences of depression. That I can't say that I suffer from depression, at least not chronically. I've been depressed. I've been very depressed. I've had I can think of one time in my life where I maybe verged on suicidal ideation, but I'm fortunate that it's not a thing I suffer with. So there was a little bit of work to do between Adam and I to to understand what that experience is for him, and to bring that to Jack. And I think I, like many people, had the question of, he's so likable, he's so charismatic, but there are scores of charismatic, likable people who suffer from depression still. They're not mutually exclusive traits. I mean, if anything, sometimes somebody who is very depressed will put on that brave face for other people, because they don't want to saddle other people with their what they're feeling. So in that regard, I did have to do some learning and stretching, but otherwise I just tried to be as open and honest as I could with it.
Well, no, and I mean, I think that's why it works, because I mean, especially Jack is this character that, I mean, there's a subtlety to him, because I mean, especially with cinematic the depictions of depression, they can very often be very overt and very sort of hit you over the head with it. But that's not life. But in many ways, as much as this is a silly ghost romantic comedy, this movie is very much life, because you're going to get all sort of ends of the spectrum sort of in one moment of your life. And I think that this film really does sort of capture that. And I mean, I'm kind of curious for both of you, like, because this had to have been a quick shoot. I'm kind of curious, how do you sort of plow through running through that gamut of, on one end, busting each other up probably in certain moments, but on the other end, having these very sort of serious, somber moments all at the same time?
I mean, I think we navigate, or at least on set, I feel like we navigated the balance fairly organically. It's not something that we had to plot our way through or develop a strategy for. I think Adam and I both share, similar senses of humor, similar worldviews, similar curiosities. And so when it was time to be funny, or when there was room to be funny, it would come out fairly naturally. I think we would both be on the same page with that. And when it was, time to be real and be open, I think that was apparent too. And Adam was great at directing us too when we needed to go even deeper, when it's like, no, really dive like headlong into it, and opened the doors for us and said, like, I've got you, you're strapped in, but dive as deep as you can go. It wasn't hard. It was a very natural conversation that we were always having.
And we really, in the course of casting, I have a philosophy with actors that it's their job to know the characters better than I do.
Yeah.
And so when we were casting, when I was meeting, with Natalie and Sydney and people, like, we wouldn't really talk about the script. We would talk about the character. We would, I remember my meeting with Sydney, asking her, like, what music do you think Rosie listens to? Because Sydney at the time was, I think, 20 or 21, and I was like 36 or something. And it's like, yeah, you're much close. I mean, I've never been close to being a teenage girl, but you're much closer. Like, I wrote this character, but like, all I can really do is write like the point of it. You have to kind of fill in and make them alive. And so because that was the kind of the angle from which we approached everything, I was also just like tickled pink. I was making a movie. Like, this is my lifelong dream. We don't have time for prep. There was a list. We're playing jazz on set, but like, also, I just every now and then we can't that like we're doing this. And everybody else kind of had a similar energy. Especially in the crew, like Mike and Jim and Chenny had worked on a bunch of other shoots.
Right.
MacLeod and I met on another movie, but like, yeah, there's nothing like making your first film as a director. And so just kind of like, it was a very honest excitement and enthusiasm that then, when we're working in the middle of a heat wave in a house with no air conditioning and we can't afford proper anything, like, and I don't know what I'm doing. So it was just like, well, let's at least have fun. Let's like make this the most pleasant experience we can. And, we all know the script. We all know the moments that are going to have to like hit hard, but you kind of you establish a rhythm with your collaborators and a kind of a vibe that you can trust me to to catch you. Like you've got to jump, and if you don't fly and you fall, no one will ever see it. But if you fly, then people are gonna be like, holy shit, that person can fly. So yeah, I think it's just faith in each other.
And I mean, I love that you say that about rhythm. And I mean, you're right. I mean, there are elements in the film where it's just like, okay, they're riffing, they're playing jazz, that everyone's having fun. And I'm kind of curious because the tone of the entire film, it does feel like everyone involved in it was really 100% on the same page. I'm curious from both your perspectives, if you can think back in your life, was there like a movie or maybe a moment in a movie where it was like the pivot point where you just went, okay, I got to do this. This is what I have to do.
Yes.
Tell the story. Do it.
I mean, broadly speaking, there were many like Back to the Future, Pulp Fiction are things that were just like, I need to do this. But specifically, the thing that now we worked on this movie for 5 years,
Yeah.
And now that it's kind of a fixed document and it's going out into the world and strangers are seeing it and for the most part seeming to like it. There's a bit in Walk the Line where they're in the studio recording for the first time and Johnny Cash and his band are playing some old gospel song. And the engineer stops him and says, guys, no one wants to hear a bunch of fellas they've never heard before play a song they've heard too many times. He says, let me put it to you this way. You're walking down the road and you get hit by a truck, you're thrown into the ditch and you're bleeding out. You have time to sing one song that speaks to your experience of this life in this world. What is that song? So when it came time to make this, I thought I may never get to make another one. And that doesn't mean you throw all of your ideas into one movie because those movies are a mess. But what do I need to say? Like if this goes sideways and no one ever sees this movie, I still will see it. I still will have a copy that I burned, the Blu-ray that I burned myself sitting on my shelf.
Right.
Like I can put it in. What do I need to hear? What is something I witness? And I say now, like I wish this movie existed when I was 15. I would have felt a little less alone. That's really the thing. Like that's what I want to do is I want to make other people feel less alone the way movies have made me feel.
That's a beautiful answer.
I'm not going to compete with that.
Dunked.
Next question.
Next question. You got it, man. All right. But honestly, you're right. You can't follow that. It's a great answer. But just to start putting a bow on this, and I mean, I love just how you say, I wish this movie had been around when I was 15. And I mean, I look at you guys being embraced by a platform and a company like Arrow to sort of get this movie out there and to sort of champion it. And I'm kind of curious from a creative standpoint, how sort of rewarding is it because on one end you made the movie, which is fantastic. Yeah, you sold it. It could have been buried onto VOD or bought by some, bigger streaming service and then just put out there and nothing would have happened. But it's being championed. It's kind of being put on the top of the banner and being encouraged for people to go watch it. How big is that for you guys creatively going forward to go, what, I think we did something right.
I mean, for me personally, I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's a saying, never stop digging, because you never know how close you are to striking gold.
Right.
And for me, that's always sort of been beside the point. For me, I kind of prefer learn to enjoy the digging, because there might not be anything else. So for me, the win is the work itself. I enjoy the making, the doing, the time spent with Adam, the time just cracking and chipping away at this film and making it. Because there's too much that's out of your control on the other end of things. And if you're trying to base all your happiness and hopes on somebody picking it up, then you're setting yourself up for some real hard feelings. So I will say, as a caveat to my embracing that philosophy, sometimes I don't always appreciate when I do hit gold.
Right.
Sometimes like we chip through some gold and I'm like, nah, don't worry about that, but it doesn't matter, head down, like keep digging. It is starting to sink in, thanks to Arrow, that how special a situation we're in. I mean, there's a South by Southwest speech that Mark Duplass gave, The Cavalry Isn't Coming, basically about you make a movie and you think, okay, now Warner Brothers is going to scoop me up and I'm made. And his whole point was, that's not going to happen. The cavalry isn't coming. But I got to say with Arrow, and I wasn't expecting this because I've had other movies distributed and that's been great and rewarding and fun. But with Arrow, it does, now that it's been rolled out, it does a little bit feel like the cavalry came, which is new, which is a new feeling. I mean, obviously it's not for the future, but just in terms of A Ghost Waits reception, it kind of feels like we've been picked up and carried along on a steed.
MacLeod and I were talking about something else last night, but I was saying, like, I kind of have to make things smaller or else I'll never get my head around them, and I'll never feel like I can meet the moment. So it's not that I was making a movie. I focus on a scene or a moment, or I'm working with this person, and it's the parts. And so it was just like, okay, I can't think that like I'm living my dream, because then I'll just freak out and have a panic attack and never get anything done. But then as you go along and you do, like, I always say, like, my job is to run through walls. And when you're running through walls, you don't really have time to appreciate the process and the privilege. So, when we finished it and we showed it to, for my 40th birthday, we showed a friends and family screening to get kind of, an idea of how people were seeing it that aren't the two of us. Right. That was amazing. And then, we got into Fright Fest Glasgow, and that was amazing. And there was just all this stuff. And I didn't know about Fright Fest. MacLeod, had movies play in it. So he was really excited, and he had submitted us. And so the first time I heard about Fright Fest was when they emailed me to tell me that they were taking the movie. I hadn't heard about Arrow before Fright Fest. But then you meet them and you're just like, oh, you love movies like I love movies. Okay, let's talk. And we just keep getting lucky. We just keep kind of finding ourselves in the right room. But the thing that I found myself thinking about, like, last week, when like the launch and everything was kind of becoming real, in Glasgow, I sat in a room with 400 strangers and watched this movie. And MacLeod had just had his little girl was just born, so he wasn't able to be there. And I was sitting alone and like had no idea what was coming. And beautiful experience. People really loved it and they were effusive. But then afterwards, after the Q&A, they were coming up and they were thanking me for the movie, saying that it made them feel seen and made them feel heard. And one guy told me that he was excited to be able to share it with his spouse, because it was going to allow them to have a conversation that they'd never really been able to have, because something in it unlocked a thing in his head where he's like, oh, this is what she was dealing with.
Right.
And so now when we have like The Guardian giving us, a really nice review, and we're on streaming, the only streaming service that Quentin Tarantino subscribes to, apparently, like all that stuff. It's great and it's huge, and like I have to make it a little smaller, but I realized that like nothing will ever beat that guy. Like, I made this movie to feel less alone, and it worked. And all the other stuff, all the trappings of the gold that you mine for, is great, and it means that like maybe we get to make more of this stuff. But like, even if we didn't, like, that guy saw it, and he came up and he told me something extremely personal and vulnerable because he felt safe to.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, I'm so grateful. And I mean, yeah, obviously, like, I like winning the awards that are over my shoulder.
Yeah.
But none of it matches that. That was just the most amazing moment.
And you know what, though? I mean, just to really tie this up in a bow, I think that's the magic of the movie, because there is this palpable energy of this character and these guys who have been digging, and they have to, they have to keep digging. But then you get this moment of the cavalry, and it's really kind of rewarding and enjoying. And be it anyone sort of in the film industry, or be it sort of across any walk of life, those elements are very relatable and they're very personable. And I think that's truly the magic of this little film. And I just want to say thank you both again for the time, and congratulations again. And thanks for the good work. Keep it up.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much. This was really lovely.
All right. Thanks, guys. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.